Welcome to the Simply Vegan podcast with me, Holly Johnson, and my co-host, Gabriella Clark. Each week, we'll be bringing you all the latest vegan news, as well as interviews with some of the top names in veganism. So, welcome to episode 6 of the Simply Vegan podcast. How are you today, Gabriella?
I'm great, thanks. How are you, Holly?
I'm okay. I'm finding this miserable weather a bit of a struggle and lockdown, but I mustn't complain.
I know it's slightly more tedious this time around, I think, where you can't spend as much time lounging in the park. But Saturday weather was awful, but Sunday picked up. So
Yeah,
it might be a bit grey, but it's not raining here. So I'm clinging on to that.
Yeah. You've just got to keep your chin up, haven't you? Looking on the bright side.
I know. At least it's got an end date this time, I hope.
I know. Yeah, fingers crossed. So I thought today we'd start off chatting about vegan fashion. Later on in this episode, I'll be chatting to Annick Ireland, who runs Immaculate Vegan, which is kind of like an online marketplace for vegan fashion and beauty and lifestyle products. And yeah, I think you've got quite an interesting story, haven't you? Because is it a year now you've not been buying anything new?
Yeah, so as I think I've mentioned, last October, my partner and I went traveling around India. And so before we went, we reduced our worldly possessions to as few as we could live with, and went on the road. And whilst we were there, we had, sounds a cliche, but a really life-changing couple of months. And I started to write a list of things that I wanted to incorporate into my lifestyle when we returned, and some have been easier than others returning into a lockdown.
Yeah.
But one of the big things for me was consumption with regards to fashion and clothing. I've always been a huge consumer of fast fashion in a way that I didn't really give a second thought to. I went to London College of Fashion as my degree, as my university, and studied my degree there, and worked in like beauty marketing for 8 years, and so was really sucked into the world of new season clothes at H&M, new clothes at Zara, buying something on my lunch break. And being away made me realize how much I was buying, wearing a couple of times, getting rid of, and buying again. And so I made a pact at the beginning of the year to go a year without buying anything new. So if I wanted to buy something, I would have to source it vintage, secondhand, eBay, charity shop, Depop, any of those. And it's really made me question what I actually need and what I'm buying, but also has made me buy things that I truly love. And in a way, I'm a little bit more satisfied, a lot more satisfied by the things that I buy, because it's been a bit of a search to find them.
Yeah. So when you buy things, do you avoid things like wool and leather, or are you okay with owning things made with those materials because they're secondhand?
So when I first went vegan, I really did just apply it to what I was eating and drinking, and didn't give so much of a thought to the clothes that I was wearing and the materials that I was buying. Certainly now I wouldn't actively buy leather, definitely not. However, things that I've had in my wardrobe for years, like I have a leather jacket that I've had for 10 years, I still have and I wear. And I know that's quite controversial. However, for me, keeping that item that I've had for a long time and wearing it because I still get the use out of it, rather than getting rid and going and buying something new, is a less sustainable option.
Yeah. I've found the same. I think, you change your diet, don't you? And it is a journey that you're on. You can't literally go vegan overnight and then, suddenly get rid of everything that you own that's been made from an animal. So it is a process, and I think it's fine for it to take time, and it is also a personal choice. And if you do have something that you've had a long time you don't want to get rid of, then personally, I think that is down to your own choice. I found it quite hard with vegan fashion. I I do find it hard to shop for it because a lot of items are very expensive if you're going for good quality. And I found that I was buying cheaper products that might be labeled vegan. For example, New Look bought out vegan fashion items, I think it was last year. And I suppose I sort of jumped on the bandwagon really and just thought, oh, it's vegan, brilliant. But now I feel like those items aren't built to last. A lot of them are made from plastic. So I think I'd really like to try a year of not buying new, like you have, or just saving up for real investment pieces. And spending that bit more on things I'm going to keep forever.
I think you're completely right about the point that you made with big brands jumping on the vegan bandwagon. And it's really easy to market something as eco or conscious or green or vegan, but actually something else probably has had to give along the line for you to be able to buy something at such an affordable price or high street price.
Yeah.
I think I've mentioned Max Lamanna on a previous episode. He's a zero waste cook. I actually found his page through his now wife, I think, who I followed first, and she is called Venetia Lamanna.
Yeah, I had a listen to her podcast after you mentioned her.
Yeah, huge really into sustainable fashion, and I love her angle because she's really, really honest. Like me, she used to buy a lot of fast fashion, a lot of brands that maybe aren't that good in terms of eco credentials, and she addresses quite a lot of topics and questions around the idea of sustainable fashion on her page. So I really recommend anyone interested in thinking about sustainability with regards to how they shop, give her a follow. Personally, for me, vegan fabrics is a little bit down the list, and first and foremost it was sustainability, and the biggest way I could address that is by not buying new, because even if I was buying a 100% organic cotton t-shirt from H&M, the footprint that t-shirt had was massive in terms of the water that it took to make it, the questionable ways in which it was produced, say in terms of paying the garment workers further down the manufacturing chain, and then also how far it's traveled to get to me. So certainly here as a vegan, I'm not going out looking for even secondhand leather, but I'm also trying not to be sucked into what is being termed as that greenwashing, I suppose. And I think H&M and brands like that are sometimes quite bad for it. Launching collections that are meant to be very eco-friendly, but actually when you scratch away are still quite high impact.
Annick later on in this episode covers a lot of issues like that. She's a very interesting woman to talk to. So I thought next we could chat about the news that a 12-year-old vegan chef has got his own cooking show on CBBC. Now, you don't have kids, do you, Gabriella? So I'm guessing CBBC isn't, on your watch list.
I mean, it's not a frequented channel in our household. However, I have many friends with toddlers and above, so it's not unheard of that I may be around their houses and CBBS or CBBC is on in the background.
Yeah. Well, I have a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old, so I've done my time with CBBC. But yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, Amari McQueen is his name, and he went vegan, I think, Well, he started cooking when he was 7 because
Amazing.
his mum, I think she had she developed an illness, leaving her unable to serve up dinners for her family. So I think he went vegan after watching a video, and he says he doesn't want to eat animals and he doesn't want them to die, and he wants to teach people to go vegan. So now he's 12. He's been cooking quite a few years, which is impressive in itself. But the fact that he's also cooking these plant-based dishes is just fantastic. And he's so sweet. He's so lovely. I watched a video on his Instagram page, and really looking forward to seeing the cookery show, actually.
Yeah, what an amazing story. When I was having a read of the article and then a browse on his channels, I just think it's so inspiring that somebody that young has such a passion for nutrition, for food and cooking. I mean, my cooking skills have really only developed at the ripe old age of 29, 30 this year. So to imagine doing it from 7 is just incredible. I think, kudos to his family for encouraging and enabling him to explore and build skills in that way. I think it's incredible, and also amazing that CBBC have given him a platform to share vegan cooking with a really young audience. I think it's brilliant. I also think it's great that the message about cooking and nutrition, and maybe as well veganism, comes to children from a child. I think it's a really easy, digestible, pardon the pun way to get the message across. And maybe it'll inspire other children to experiment in the kitchen and think about eating more variety that they might not have thought about before. So yeah, I think it's a really lovely, positive story.
Yeah, when I think of my 2 children, they might be able to cobble some pasta together with the 2 of them in the kitchen, but it usually ends up in a fight. So yeah, I'm going to watch this and see if I can get my 2 to do a bit more cooking, because I think I was always brought up to kind of keep out of the kitchen, even though my dad was a chef. For many,
really?
Yeah, he started off as a chef, and then he went into education, so he taught cookery, and
Wow.
then became sort of vice principal of various colleges around the UK. But it was very much that was his job, so he didn't really cook at home. And my mum had 4 children, so it was always, stay out of the way. So I just, I never cooked for myself. I went to uni and I was literally putting frozen meals in the oven, and that's about as as good as it got. And when I think where I'm at now, I'm really into nutrition and obviously vegan, and it's a huge change. But like you say, that's much later in life, so hopefully we can inspire the next generation not to be like us, to to start from a young age.
Definitely. And I think I keep using a lot of food puns, but I think there's an appetite. It's tragic in a way.
You're on fire today, Gabriella.
I know, for a Monday. I definitely think there's an appetite. Interestingly, my brother has so obviously he's a bit older than the CBBC target age group, but he's just gone to uni this term, and he is 20, just turned 20, and has recently decided, after watching one of Attenborough's programs, to go vegetarian, if not entirely vegan. And so I sent him a vegan cookbook, and he has become obsessed with cooking, meal planning. He's asked for pots and pans for Christmas.
Oh, wow.
I FaceTimed him last night. He was showing me his meal plans for the week. And so I think, once there's that inspiration there, and the onus, I suppose, that, all your meals aren't just cooked for you and you just come downstairs, eat it and go back up. It can be really inspiring, really fun, really interesting. So yeah, the fact that Amari is doing this for even younger kids is amazing. What a great little guy.
It's sometimes a bit of a divisive issue, isn't it? Vegan kids. I know, I mean, my daughter went vegan shortly after me. She was actually vegetarian for a little while before that. And she's inspired me. She's so strict and will not touch anything. Sometimes I've
Wow.
bought something by accident and there's been a little bit of milk powder in it or something. And I've said, oh, just have, just have a biscuit or a crisp or whatever. No, not having it, not having it.
Wow.
I think she's developed such a strong sense of smell. She can literally smell the sort of the dairy and things a mile off. But it is very inspiring. And I'm not going to lie, sometimes I have had moments where I've thought, oh, just had a little wobble, not to eat meat or anything like that, but perhaps something that's vegetarian. And she keeps me on the right track. But obviously she wasn't vegan from birth, neither was my son. So I think I would bring them up differently now, and I do actually really wish that I had raised them vegan, but obviously I wasn't vegan at the time. I mean, if you were to have children, do you think you'd bring them up as vegans?
I mean, I as confidently as I can say it now, I would, for sure. I actively choose not to consume animal products, not just for the planet reasons, but also for the health reasons. And so for that same reason, I wouldn't give it to my children. I think it is a controversial topic. I've got friends who are vegan who have had children and raised them from birth as vegan. And one of my friends' child in particular has the most incredible appetite and palate for a 4-year-old you've ever met. I mean, we've been out for lunch with them and he's ordering dishes with artichokes and olives and all these things that, I mean, I just would never have touched as a 3-4-year-old. So no. It's really inspiring to see that. But then I've read a lot of, or heard a lot of opinions to the contrary, that is, well, until they have the right to choose, it's not something you should force on them. But I'm really of the school of thought that until they have the right to choose, should they really be forced to be eating meat and dairy?
Well, this is it. Yes, you can flip it, can't you? Just because we've been brought up, as a society that agrees or thinks it's okay to eat animal products. Well, is that actually right? Are we coming away from that school of thinking now and realizing that it's not always that healthy? It's not great for the planet, and it's not great for the animals either.
No, I think it will remain important to me when I have a family of my own, and it's something I'm really passionate about. And like I say, I wouldn't put it in my own body now, especially something like dairy. So would certainly steer clear of giving it to my children. Does Poppy ever find it difficult in terms of staying at friends' houses?
Sometimes. I mean, all her friends are pretty good. Some of them have sort of gone vegetarian since sort of being inspired by her, I guess. Some of the parents have said they wouldn't let their child go vegan, which has surprised me. They've sort of said it's too difficult, which to me, it's if your child's expressing an interest to try a diet, then I'd personally sort of want to read up and support them with that. But yeah, no, when she goes for sleepovers, we'll often send food with her. I mean, it's getting easier now, isn't it? You can grab a vegan pizza from Tesco.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's come up, certainly with friends of ours who have children who they've raised vegan, who are just about starting school. They're conscious that they get invited round to a friend's house in the week, stipulating, oh, you can't give them anything meat, dairy. It does make it a little bit difficult. But at the same time, I think, all the reports that we've covered over the last 5 episodes previous have shown such growth, not just in people experimenting with or fully turning to veganism, but also the options that are out there now in supermarkets to cater to a vegan diet are growing hugely. So hopefully that makes the whole thing a lot easier. But yeah, really interesting topic, I think, especially when it comes to having and raising your children vegan or not.
Yeah. I wish, you know, if I'd done it, then meal times would be a lot easier. I could just I'm about to cook tea in a minute and I'm thinking, oh, what am I going to make? But yeah, I think that's not for another episode, discussing how to feed vegans and non-vegans in one meal.
Definitely. Well, hopefully, as you say, the more recipes and inventive vegan alternatives that come out, hopefully it will be easier to switch it up for and maybe non-vegans who are in your household, that they still enjoy the food and are fulfilled by it without having to have a completely separate meal every single night of the week.
Yeah, definitely. So we were hoping to taste test our cheese today, weren't we? But
we were. Another week, Holly, of camping by my doorstep. No avail.
I mean, we know that our listeners are just, you know, desperate to hear about our cheese taste test.
The edge of their seats, I imagine.
But they're going to have to wait one more week, unfortunately.
Next up, I chat to Annick Ireland from Immaculate Vegan about the innovations taking place in the vegan fashion industry.
So thank you so much for joining us today on the Simply Vegan podcast.
Oh, you're welcome.
Shall we start off by perhaps introducing yourself and telling us about Immaculate Vegan, you know, what it is and how it came about?
Yeah, sure. So I became vegan a few years ago, and I found, to be honest, the food side of it really easy, relatively, because I think there's so many different options now, so many recipes to choose from. So that bit was fine, but what I did slightly struggle with was the fashion side. So I like buying nice things. I like buying high quality things. You know, I don't like fast fashion. So when I started kind of Googling, you know, vegan bags, vegan shoes, basically trying to buy things that weren't made of animal leather, I became really disheartened. So I started, you know, finding things that probably might be what a lot of us think of as stereotypes of vegan fashion, right? So, you know, shoes that look a bit like Cornish pasties, really sort of practical, chunky stuff, you know, clothes that sort of weren't really very fashionable. And I started thinking, well, I'm going to have to make a lot of compromises if I'm going to be vegan. And that's fine, because I was kind of, you know, I was committed to it, but I wasn't feeling very excited about it. And then I thought, I'll go onto Instagram and just have a look around to see, you know, if I can find vegan brands that might be lurking out there. And actually that was just a delight, because I found that there were so many vegan brands all around the world, you know, beautiful footwear brands, beautiful, you know, bags and accessories brands, amazing vegan leather jackets. There was a credible choice out there, but it was just quite hard to find. So these are often relatively small brands doing, you know, not very much marketing or quite local marketing. And they're not easy for somebody who wants to, you know, make that switch or choose alternatives to find. So I thought, well, I'll start an Instagram blog, essentially. I called it Immaculate Vegan from the start. And that was really all about showing people that you can find things that look great, that feel great, that are great quality, and that can still be animal free. So you don't have to make that compromise between, you know, essentially ethics and aesthetics. So I started that. This was, you know, a few years ago. Got lots of followers, had loads of really great feedback. The brands were contacting me really excited and wanting to sort of, you know, flag themselves off if I didn't know about them already. I also just saw that there were new brands launching all the time, which was really exciting. So that kind of grew. And then it felt like the natural next step was to essentially create a place where people could buy from those brands. I was already getting quite a lot of questions around that already. You know, where can I buy this? Can I buy this from you? So it felt like, to me, there was a big gap in the market. And then I found my co-founder Simon was introduced through a friend. He runs a digital agency which specializes in creating websites for brands, often fashion brands as well, particularly the high-end brands. So he had a lot of experience in that area. And when we met, I'd kind of gone to him for advice, but he said, well, I'm vegan. I've recently become vegan. I think this is an amazing idea. I also see there's a big gap in the market. Why don't we do it together? So that's what we did. And yeah, we sort of, you know, spent a bit of time, obviously, making sure that we created a really strong platform. We got lots of amazing brands on board, and then we launched a year ago. So where we are now is that, essentially what Immaculate Vegan is a we call ourselves a sort of lifestyle platform and also a curated shop. So we have 130 brands, over 1,800 products now, across fashion, but also beauty and homewares. And it's really, I guess our single thing that brings these all together is these are really high quality, beautiful brands that are, very much at the forefront, I think, of vegan fashion. We're also trying to build up local collections as well. So we have global brands, making sure that we have good collections in the UK, in Europe, in the US, and then sort of, outside of that, so that people can shop more locally and sustainably as well as vegan. So yeah, so a year in, been brilliant so far, and very excited about the future.
So have you found business is going well then? Is there the demand there for vegan fashion?
Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, I mean, I think, I was we're fundraising at the moment. So, we've done quite a lot of work on looking at the market size for our pitch deck and all of that. I was actually quite surprised by how large the vegan market is already. So, it's around, I think, $400 billion in the world. That's just the women's vegan fashion market, right? Gosh. So not including other lifestyle and beauty. It's huge. And it's actually predicted to grow faster than vegan food. So it's growing at an average rate of about 14%. And that's predicted for the next, I think, 7 years. Fantastic. So yeah, so it's a really big market, I think. And it is growing. It's really dynamic. I think we're quite lucky in that, obviously, with COVID, which was, still a really hard time in many ways, and we did have to adapt. But the fact that we're an online only business obviously hugely helps. Pretty much all of our brands could carry on trading throughout the whole period. But also, I think COVID has just accelerated how much people are thinking about, ethics and sustainability when it comes to fashion. I mean, obviously, it's just, throwing an even more of a light, I think, on issues that were obviously pervasive and, people were concerned about already, like global warming, like, deforestation, habitat loss, all those things that we know are causing huge pressure on the earth, but also animal populations. And so now we've got this whole other area around that, which is, well, actually, there's a real public health aspect to that as well, which is, if we carry on destroying animal populations and we live in close proximity to them, put pressure on them and we trade in them, that's going to lead to things like, it certainly creates an environment anyway, where you're more likely to have pandemics like COVID. So I think that for us has actually, got our potential audience even more interested in the kind of solutions that we have to offer. So, I mean, it's definitely been up and down. And I think, at the beginning, people pretty much, stopped buying things, particularly sort of a lot of, things like, people weren't buying high heels, or really nice clothing, but they were buying lots of trainers. So it was, they were buying other things. But yeah, in the last, few months, certainly we've been, been growing really, really fast. And the nice thing is most of our customers aren't vegan. So, I mean, obviously we have vegans find us naturally, but where we see the potential is really around that sort of conscious consumer audience. These are, people, that I'm sure you guys, see quite a lot as well. People who are doing meat-free Mondays or just trying to, introduce more plant-based into their diet. They're concerned about the environment. They want to see what they can do. And they understand that the choices they make every day do make a difference. So whether that's, thinking, oh, I wonder, I need a new tote bag. I'll see if I can get a vegan leather one instead. It's that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's actually, we've been quite lucky. COVID has been quite good to us, although, I certainly wouldn't wish the situation in general.
So for anyone new to veganism that's listening, I mean, what is vegan fashion? We obviously know that things like leather and wool. What other animal products are used in fashion?
Yeah, so so I mean, leather and wool are obviously the really common ones, as is fur. Still, unfortunately, surprisingly, actually used quite a lot by many brands. But also silk. So silk is a really big one that, again, is not on most people's radar. But actually, it's been identified as, I think it's the second most environmentally damaging fabric used in fashion, next to leather. Forget even just about the animal cruelty side of it, just purely from sustainability, it's pretty bad. And then there's obviously down, so feathers, essentially used from ducks and geese that are used in, everything from sort of, your puffer jackets, Canada goose is obviously a big one, to also bedding. So yeah, they're the really common ones. But there's also just things like dyes, so some brands will use dyes to color their products that are made from crushed insects, for example. Things like glues can often come from, from animal products as well. So it's sometimes it's the big things, but it's also those little things as well that sort of end up turning up in, in places that you least suspect. even things like buttons. So we had to recently turn down a brand we really wanted to work with. They made beautiful bamboo silk pajamas, but they use mother of pearl buttons. And mother of pearl comes from the oyster industry, and these are farmed animals, you know, essentially. So yeah, we had to turn them down. So it's all kinds of things that you least expect.
Yeah, it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it?
Oh god, it really is.
So what materials are used in the vegan fashion industry?
So I mean, I guess do you mean more, you know, alternatives to sort of leather and wool and things like that? Yeah. So the main things, I mean, when it comes to wool, it's fairly simple actually. So organic cotton is one that we sell quite a lot. We have you know, beautiful knitwear that's made from organic cotton over conventional non-organic cotton, because it's much more sustainable. So uses much less water and no pesticides. Linen, hemp, you know, are other ones that are really popular as well. But there are, you know, being produced lots of other sort of sustainable wool alternatives using other materials as well. But they're the main ones. Obviously, we sort of try and sheer away from things like virgin polyester, because that's not very sustainable. But that is another alternative. When it comes to leather, to be honest, the choice now is just incredible. And it does vary a lot, right? So you've got, you know, one end, you know, you've got PVC, which is used a lot by fast fashion brands. So, you know, polyvinyl chloride, it's a kind of sort of quite cheapy kind of looking plasticky kind of substance, but it's very durable and it is inexpensive, and that's why fast fashion brands use it. So we don't sell any of that because it is quite toxic in terms of how it's produced. You then have other vegan leathers that are made from what you know is still a plastic, but it's called polyurethane or PU. So that is used a lot. It's much better quality. It looks and feels a lot like animal leather, which is why it's so common. But it can be produced in different ways. And this is why, you know, plastic, you know, as a term, I think a lot of people think, God, that's terrible. But actually it encompasses a very wide range of things, some of which are much better, some of which are much worse. So the brands that we use who use polyurethane leather generally produce in Europe, where there are very, very strict controls over emissions from polyurethane. And even better, a lot of them are actually using recycled plastics. So these are plastics that are, you know, rescued from industrial processes, but also from ocean plastic as well. That can be used to create vegan leather, which again is really high quality and is taking waste out of the environment. So that's the kind of the plastic side of it, I would say. So, you know, a lot of diversity. The more exciting stuff, which I'm sure you've heard about, is all the fruit leathers that are coming out now.
Yeah.
So these are, you know, I think these get people feeling really excited because they're just, you know, they're incredibly innovative. So that's the nice thing about vegan fashion. There's just so much innovation happening in terms of materials technology. So you've got things like cactus leather, which is really beautiful, very, very high quality, very sustainable. So it doesn't, you know, cactuses require hardly any water to grow, no pesticides. They're actually better than animal leather in some ways because they don't react to moisture or water in the same way that animal leather does. So, you know, animal leather cracks or can rot, cactus leather doesn't, so it's really resistant. Then you've got things like apple leather. I've got quite a few apple leather products and they're really beautiful. So they're made from again, a waste product. So the cores and skin from the apple harvest in Bolzano in Italy, which is one of the world's biggest apple harvests. So these were just being thrown away.
Wow.
And now they're being used to create this beautiful you know, leather alternative. It can look like animal leather, it can look like suede, it's really hard wearing, it can take pretty much any color, it looks gorgeous. So that's a lovely vegan leather. There's also, I mean, there's so many now. There's Pinatex, which is quite a well-known one as well. So this one uses pineapple leaves from the pineapple harvest. So this is often giving, you know, subsistence farmers a whole nother source of income. It doesn't quite look like animal leather. It does look a bit different. So I don't know if you've seen it, but it's slightly more crinkly.
Yeah.
It looks lovely, but it looks really good with metallic. So you often see it in sort of gold or bronze or silver, and that can look lovely. And then you've got cork leather, which again, you know, it's got a slightly different look, but it can look, you know, really, really beautiful as well. Really lightweight, very sustainable. There's grape skin leather now, there's mushroom leather. So there's just a whole range of stuff. The most common ones that we probably see are apple leather, Pinatex, and recycled plastics. Actually, there is one, sorry, that I forgot to mention, which is really important. And that's a leather made from what's called biopoly oils. So basically these are, so just like, you know, normal petrochemical based plastics are essentially made of an oil, these are almost like plant-based plastics. So essentially they're using oils from cereal crops. So these cereal crops are often, again, grown very sustainably. They're not for food use. They're not sort of taking up land that would be used for food consumption. And they're oils that are entirely plant-based, and they're made into, again, a very, very flexible, really durable, but also water-resistant leather. And we see quite a lot of our brands, particularly a lot of our high-end brands, that are using that sort of 100% plant-based material as well. So yeah, so there's so many, and there's new ones coming out all the time, to be honest. When this airs, there's probably going to be, you know, several more. So it's a really exciting area. Yeah, definitely not full of plastics, and you can definitely stay well away from PVC.
So are these fabrics expensive?
To be honest, they vary a lot in price. So I think that, yeah, that sort of is vegan leather or is vegan fashion expensive question is one that we get asked a lot. And generally what I say is it can be and it cannot be. In the same way that I would say to people, it's exactly the same as non-vegan fashion, really, right? So what often makes fashion or any product really more expensive is the supply chain. So what's going into it? So the reason I think why, you know, certainly some of the stuff that we sell is more expensive than fast fashion, for example, is we work with brands that want to pay their workers fairly, you know, so they make sure that the workers are paid a living wage or above, you know, often well above. They have conditions, you know, where health and safety is being invested in, that they have, you know, benefits like pensions and maternity and paid holiday and things like that, things that we take for granted, but that many workers throughout the world don't have, and that certainly fast fashion, you know, doesn't adhere to at all. So that's a really important aspect of, you know, where cost comes from. The other thing is obviously, you know, how the materials that are being used. And so again, it varies. So, you know, you've got the cheaper vegan leathers, you know, certainly like the likes of PVC, which are used a lot in fast fashion, are really cheap, but they're really unsustainable. If you want to go for the more sustainable fabrics, they are generally more costly, because just the very essence of sustainability is, you know, is a more costly process, really. Then there's things like packaging. You know, again, a lot of the brands we work with, you know, use sustainable packaging. So it's either, you know, it's recycled, it's recyclable, you know, it's plastic free quite often. So again, those things kind of tend to put a bit more cost into the supply chain. So I think, you know, yeah, is vegan fashion expensive? It sort of depends on how sustainable you want to be. It's more of a question around sustainability, I would say, rather than being vegan.
Yeah.
But what I would say is I do think there's quite a lot of choice out there. So it's not the case that you have to, you know, you have to spend a lot of money, even to be sustainable. And it's not that sustainable is like a binary thing, you know, you either are or you aren't. It's a scale, right? So
yeah,
I think what we always say to people is just, you know, buy the best you can afford and just really try and find out more about the brand, you know, where they make their things, how transparent they are about who's making them and what they're made from. And just make the best choice you can. But yeah, there is a variety. And so, for example, at Immaculate Vegan, we have bags starting at £50, and we have bags at £500. You know, not many of that end. You know, the vast majority probably between 100 and 200. But we do have cheaper bags, but we don't have anything at £10 or £20, because to do that would be very much in fast fashion territory, which is not where we want to be.
Yeah, I think we need to just, you know, globally sort of move away from that, don't we? I mean, we're so used to being able to pick up a jumper for, you know, £10 or even less somewhere like Primark. Yeah. So when, you know, you are presented with a jumper that's made from sustainable materials and, you know, has a transparent supply chain and everything else that you've mentioned, you know, sometimes it's a bit of a shock to see the price tag. But I think we just need to move towards seeing, you know, that buying things like that as an investment rather than just a quick fix, a quick, you know, sort of added extra to your wardrobe that you don't necessarily need.
I think that's exactly, and you're right, it's become so normalized that actually prices that maybe wouldn't have been relatively shocking, you know, to a few generations back, now do seem shocking to people because they are just so used to seeing things that are so cheap. And of course, because, you know, how things are made is so far away from us, we often just don't see it. We don't realize there is cost there. It's just you're not paying that cost. Somebody else is, right? Because they're not being paid enough to actually live. So, you know, or they're, you know, materials being produced that are actually hugely damaging to the environment, and there's cost elsewhere to have to deal with that. So yeah, I think we, you know, moving away from that sort of very fast-paced consumption where we're constantly encouraged to just buy and buy new things all the time, towards a much more sustainable one where we buy much less, but we buy better and it lasts longer, and then actually market as well, because you can keep rebuying it because it's going to last as well. Yeah, that ultimately is where I think fashion very much needs to go, and we're definitely seeing a movement there. But yeah, it's taking some time, I think.
Yeah, hopefully, like you were saying, if anything good can come out of COVID, then hopefully that's one of the things, that we're not out shopping all the time
Exactly,
for the sake of it.
Yeah, and I think as well, I mean, my mum had a saying which was, which she grew up, I think, got from her mother, which was, "I'm not rich enough to buy cheap things." And I think it's actually the more pressure sometimes you have in your own finances, you do think, I can't. Buying a lot of cheap things actually is not inexpensive. It's actually very expensive, because those things don't last, particularly with staples where you're having to rebuy them and rebuy them. You're actually financially better off really thinking about, what few things do I wear all the time? And therefore, how can I buy just the best that I can afford of those things so that they really do last? And ultimately, that's going to save me money over time.
So would you say things like wool and leather can ever be ethical?
So this is a really hard one, isn't it? Because, I don't know about you, but I do often get people saying, well, surely wool isn't that bad. And, or I've heard that there's, this brand that are using really ethical wool or vegetable tan leather. Surely that, it even gets called eco leather.
Yeah.
So my personal feeling is no. What I would say is, and I will explain that, but what I would say is, I think, again, like ethical and sustainable are not, you're either one or you're the other.
Yeah.
There's obviously a scale, and it's objective, and it depends on what you personally can you think is acceptable, I think, to some extent too. So I think, for me, the reason they're not, and I think there's actually a couple of reasons. So one is fundamentally, they're about exploiting animals, and as soon as animals are treated like commodities, they are, unfortunately, they are not treated well. And I think people sort of have this idea, which has been, I think, fostered by the fashion industry for so long, that these are natural materials, therefore they're going to be kind to the environment. If anything, the very opposite is true. So, we've certainly seen, how most sheep and often cows, because that's where most leather comes from, are treated, and it's pretty horrific. Everything from cows being forced to walk hundreds of miles, emaciated, collapsing, and then having pepper rubbed in their eyes to keep them going, and then being skinned alive. I mean, that's the really horrific stuff, right, that most people would balk at and think, oh my God, I want nothing to do with that. But that's the reality of how a lot of cow leather is produced. But even to sheep that are, I think that there have been 100 undercover investigations on 4 continents into sheep farming, large-scale sheep farms, which is where the vast majority, obviously, of wool comes from. And they found, regular stomping, kicking. There are practices like mulesing in wool, where essentially what that means is there's a strip of flap of skin that's cut out from essentially the lamb's behind, because it stops it getting disease from flies. So it's ultimately, it helps it live. Which is obviously important economically for the wool industry, but it's incredibly painful. It's done without anesthesia, and the sheep sort of suffers for several weeks. So sort of normal wool and leather, I would say, which is the vast majority that's out there, let's not shy away from that, is pretty horrific. Now, are there better ways? Like 100%, of course there are. So what's often described as ethical wool is there's no mulesing, for example. So this horrible practice is taken away. It's much smaller scale. The animals have way more land to graze on. They're treated better in general. They're given better quality food. They're allowed to live a bit longer. So, are all those things better? Are they more ethical? Like, absolutely they are. And I would 100% rather somebody bought ethical wool, what's, being described as wool that's raised in that kind of way, than the more sort of traditional, large scale, ubiquitous wool that's out there. But I think what you can't shy away from is the fact that ultimately the animal is going to be killed. And even in wool, unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize this, but sheep aren't allowed to live out their natural years. At some point, they stop producing wool to the same rate, and at that point, they're killed. So sheep are still killed, and we're talking about billions of sheep throughout the world. And just the same as dairy cows are, for example, when they become unable to produce enough milk. So that you're still fundamentally killing an animal that doesn't want to die and doesn't need to die. I think the other factor which often gets overlooked is that actually the more ethical sometimes you are, the less sustainable you are. And that's a really horrible fact, I think, for a lot of people. So it comes down to, again, to be more ethical, it's more land, it's more resources, it's more energy. That's actually very unsustainable. So one of the biggest problems around animal farming, whether it's for materials like wool and leather or for food, is actually how much land it uses. And often that land is forests that are being cut down. And that's leading to, you know, huge issues, right, in terms of carbon, you know, greenhouse gases that can't be absorbed anymore, but also obviously, you know, devastating habitat loss for so many species. So those same problems are still being caused by ethical and sustainable leather and wool production, you know, if not they're exacerbated by it. So for me, it feels like, you know, why would you not choose the alternatives? There are so many alternatives out there. There's just no need to try and, I think, make compromises and try and make it a bit better when you can just make it a lot better and, you know, a lot better and not go there.
Yeah. So what about buying secondhand, sort of, you know, leather or wool or silk?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not necessarily against it. I think this gets debated a lot amongst vegans, doesn't it? And you have people sort of that are like, well, you know, secondhand fashion's amazing, which I, you know, agree. You know, buying secondhand is the most sustainable thing you can do. So from a sustainability point of view, is buying secondhand leather better than buying a new non-leather item? Yes, actually it is, because no new resources have been created at all into going into that item. So from that point of view, brilliant, highly sustainable. On the other hand, where I personally would feel uncomfortable doing that is because for me, I think it could encourage people to continue to look at those materials as something that's desirable and normal. And you know, part of you know, changing human behavior is actually about showing them different norms, right? So if we start to see things as just normal, we tend to keep doing those things and forgetting about the fact they may not be very ethical or sustainable. If we start to see different things as normal, we're much more able, I think, to change our behaviors and attitudes. So for me, it's more that issue that I have, as well as maybe just a personal issue that I just don't really, because I kind of, like, you know, I know now what animal leather means. I just don't really like the feeling about it. I think what's quite interesting is when you ask somebody that is absolutely fine about buying secondhand leather and wool, how they'd feel about buying secondhand fur. Suddenly, then it's very different. You know, they wouldn't wear a secondhand fur coat, and I think that's because fur is now seen as such a, oh my God, it's so horrendous, which it is, of course. But it's funny, people don't think of leather and wool in the same way. Whereas I think there are so many aspects of how they're produced that are just as horrible and, you know, lead to just as much suffering. So that's an interesting one for me. But yeah, but I'd always encourage people to buy secondhand over new, where they can find, you know, what they want, I think. But yeah, I personally wouldn't want to wear those items.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Especially for new vegans. I think, you know, you might have your old leather jacket. What do you do with it? Do you get rid of it, or, you know?
And I still have that. I definitely wouldn't encourage people to just bin all their stuff and go and buy new stuff at all. Because that's incredibly unsustainable, isn't it? Not to mention pretty unaffordable. You know, what I would encourage them to do instead is, you know, as long as they still feel comfortable with that, is wear what they've got, wear it out, and then when they need something new, at that point think about, okay, you know, well, maybe my backpack is like falling apart now, I do need a new backpack, or I do need, you know, a new leather jacket or a new pair of trousers, or whatever it is. Okay, now I'm going to choose a new item that's, you know, or even another secondhand item that you know, is vegan. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't encourage people just to go and throw away everything they've got. And of course, they can always, you know, if they don't want to wear it themselves, give it to charity, give it to friends, you know, make sure it's still being hopefully used, and, you know, that animal didn't necessarily, you know, suffer completely needlessly. But yeah, I think it's a really hard one. I can see both sides of the debate.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's the same with your diet, isn't it? It's not necessarily something you can do overnight, and, you know, it can be
exactly
a slow process. So
I think the worst thing vegans can do is beat themselves up about, you know, not being perfect or suddenly having to make 100% massive lifestyle changes, particularly if they're not affordable ones. I think, you know, just remember every change makes a difference. It's absolutely fine for it to be an incremental journey. And just be proud of the changes that you are making, and then, you know, use that as impetus to make the next one, rather than thinking, oh my God, I have to be 100% perfect, because no one is, and that just never helps, you know, you make any change, I think, or for that change to be sustainable anyway. Yeah,
that's really good advice. Do you think that vegan fashion will sort of come on into the mainstream and we'll see it in high street shops?
I mean, 100%. I think we're seeing it already. You know, I know even last year, Marks and Spencer, you know, announced a whole new range of vegan footwear. You know, I think they had over 100 styles. Again, you know, it wasn't necessarily sustainable in terms of the fabrics or how it was produced, although M&S are actually pretty good in a lot of sustainability areas. But, you know, it was vegan. I think, you know, we're seeing H&M, you know, have their sort of conscious collection, you know, again, dodgy sustainability, but vegan nonetheless. So there are quite a few high street brands that are doing what they're very explicitly calling vegan collections. I think that, I mean, there's definitely sustainability issues around those because they're not necessarily changing their other practices, and they're obviously still producing a lot of collections. But I think what they're doing really well is they're providing things that are affordable, and they're also just making the whole sort of concept of vegan fashion and vegan materials, like, you know, people are hearing words like vegan silk and going, oh, that's the thing then. You know, they're just making that more ubiquitous and therefore normalizing it, and I think that's only a really, really good thing. So yeah, I think we're seeing it, we'll see more and more of it. You know, I think brands are realizing that this is just such a massive opportunity because consumers are interested and they want to, you know, they want to have those alternatives. So yeah, that's all good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Annick. I could listen to you all day. You just
Oh, thank you. I'm sure I could talk about this all day.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah,
you're very welcome. A pleasure.
Look forward to seeing what you do next with Immaculate Vegan.